This morning, Lina is in studio to just give us an update on this stock market update. Lina, good morning.
Good morning, David. How are you?
Well, I'm great. It's Monday, so
Yes.
I'm not quite keep, but it's Monday.
Yeah, Monday is always an opportunity for new starts. So let's get this week on a row. I think but before we obviously start the week, we need to review how we did last week. And that's what we always do here with the stock market news. So let's go through the numbers. It was an interesting one.
Indeed.
So market turnover in the past week, which ended on the 20th of June. So about 23.3 million. It's definitely lower than the previous week. Last week was about 83 million. This week about 23 million in terms of turnover, in terms of the total value of the transactions which happened. That was what was there. The number of trades also fell by about 21%. So a slightly slower week than the previous week. Interestingly, though, the volume, in other words, the number of shares that traded, though, was higher than the previous week. So it rose by 67%. So 6.9 million shares were traded last week. So it's very interesting how the market works. You can have a week where your turnover is a little bit lower than the previous week, but more shares were traded. Right. So always just take note of these terms. Remember we learned about them in the beginning: turnover, volume, trades, all those terms. So keep those in mind. If you haven't, try to skip back and remember what we learned previously. I will probably do a review day one of these days. So it's a very interesting shift which we see sometimes in the market. However, it's nothing to be scared of or afraid of. These are market dynamics. That's how the market works. That's how trades happen on the market. So in terms of who dominated the week, Zambia dominated in terms of trading, accounting for 85% of the total turnover which was there, right? And then 95% in terms of the volumes traded. So Zambia was, there was a lot of trades which happened in Zambia. So obviously it indicates strong investor confidence in that particular stock for people to buy in there. CEC once again is there, Zanaco with the most actively traded stocks by the number of transactions which took place in those stocks. So CEC and Zanaco also were there were some trades in those particular stocks. And then in terms of price movement, in terms of the change of price going up or down, Standard Chartered led in terms of the gainers. They were up with a 5% rise. So followed by Airtel, which your favorite, climbed 2%. Zambia Sugar posted very small up by 0.02%, but it was up. CC, Chilanga, Zanaco all recorded losses in the previous week, though none of them exceeded 0.2% in terms of a decline. So they were all wasn't a significant decline per se, but it was a small decline of mainly 0.2% or 0.2%. So you'd say relatively stable conditions, despite the reduced turnover from the previous week, but rather the market was rather stable in this week. And then on the quoted tier of our market, CC Africa recorded a decline of 2%. So apart from that, I think the market did relatively okay this week. It was a stable week. It was definitely slower than the previous week. Still good, still opportunity. As I say, the market is still alive and kicking. And again, volume traded, there were a lot of shares traded last week, more than the previous week. So I think there's great opportunity. So do make sure that you keep watching our market. We've got a lot of, as I mentioned, statistics, information on our socials, on our website, which we can all pick on and read on. Yeah. So that's how the week looked like last week.
That's great. But I have a question on how the market really, because we definitely have to see that the other week the week was the market was okay. Then last week it declined. What are the factors that really determine the declining of a market?
Yeah, so the ups and downs. I mean, it really is at the end of the day what the investors are thinking. So it comes down to investor sentiment, and what the investor thinks is also based on information the investor knows. So I'll give certain dynamics. These are not set in stone, but these are things which do typically affect the market. So, for example, if you hear something, maybe an announcement in terms of monetary policy from Bank of Zambia, they'll say, oh, we're keeping the rates the same, or we're increasing the rates, or we're decreasing the rates. All that matters because at the end of the day, the people ask, okay, so how does that impact me? All right. okay, it's going to impact me. Maybe I've got a loan, or maybe I've got this, or maybe I've got that. But it impacts me. Should I buy or sell in this particular sector because of that? So remember, the investor is thinking because of the information he has gotten. If somebody like a significant person in the economy ministry, minister of finance or the president announces something which possibly could affect how things work, you start to think, okay, if that is happening, how does that now affect the sector this particular entity is in? Or how will it affect the performance of this particular company? Then I'll say, do I want to buy or do I want to sell? Do I want to... So really, prices change because it's a market based on investor sentiment, what people know, and how that affects us as an investor in the particular stocks that we're invested in.
Wow, I think that's a lot to take in, but I think you always ask me if I have bought shares or not.
I was about to ask you actually.
Nope, I haven't. Not yet.
We need to do better. So we need to either we need to start a poll or we need to start something.
Indeed.
We need to have you, first of all, you downloaded the application, if I remember correctly. So now we need to just trade. So in other words, I'm very sure it's very seamless. Once you do it, you let me know, and then we will tell people how this works, and we can walk through you, of course, David, so that people can understand how the market works.
Indeed. Thank you for coming through, Lina.
No worries, David.